So this is 19, is it 2030 GMT in the evening of Thursday, the 6th of October 2022. This is the KhoodeelaarTV television channel broadcasting on the internet under the banner of BabyAngelGeronimo editions. This is being broadcast only on the internet, not on satellite, not on terrestrial, and not on cable networks or cable platforms. This edition is being broadcast by the Khoodeelaar campaign, presented by me, Muhammad Haque, who was present in Tottenham in the evening of the 6th of October 1985. That was later to become probably the most widely reported and racistly reported confrontation between the protesting black community and the police, the London Metropolitan Police. Remember the date, 6th of October 1985. That was just a year before the Greater London Council was brought to an end by the administration of Margaret Thatcher and the central government. But the fact that Broadwater Farm riot took place showed that the GLC was completely, totally, and utterly with the racist status quo. And the murder of the young black mother, she's young, she was under 40 years old, Cynthia Jarrett. Murder caused by the police pushing her, as stated by her daughter. That was the actual trigger. That happened on the 5th of October 1985, and the following day there was a demonstration outside the Tottenham station of the Metropolitan Police by angry black people. It wasn't a huge gathering, but its impact was far heavier and wider and bigger than the number of people who turned up. I arrived there in the car of somebody. I don't drive now, and I didn't drive in 1985. For very ethical reason, I never want to drive, because driving in London or in any other country involves absolute aggravation, and it is not conducive to a calm journey or travel. So driving is done mostly by irresponsible people anyway. And driving, by definition, involves negotiating through the very congested and very heavily kind of congested streets in metropolitan parts of the world. So I decided very early on that I would not drive, because if I couldn't drive, I would not be able to get behind a driving wheel. So therefore, I would not drive and get involved in any of the many issues and confrontations that would happen. That's as simple as that. So by definition, I wasn't driving in October 1985. But somebody, this is now October to 6th of October 2022. So it's decades later. Looking back on that communication, it feels like that was a complete fantasy, because I had not known of a gathering outside the Tottenham branch of the Metropolitan Police at that time, on that day, and this evening or that afternoon. And the media communications in October 1985 were far less accessible than they are now with the social media, etc., etc. But this is a first-hand account. So somebody who knew where I was living at the time arrived without any notice and said to me that there is a demonstration outside the police station in Tottenham. And they said words to the effect that, would you like to go? Out of curiosity, and because of the theme having been in the news in the previous week because of what happened in Brixton, because that was Brixton and Cherry Gross had been attacked by the Metropolitan Police. And there was this riot in Brixton a few days earlier. So this was just piling on pressure to end the deadly police harassment of Black community. Most people targeted by the police harassment turned out to be innocent of the alleged crime or alleged incident and be misconduct whatsoever. So we shall talk more about that later. Now, because of the events in Brixton, it was a topical issue. And in October 1985, which is just over a year after I decided at the meeting of the then Tower Hamlets Council of Citizens of Tower Hamlets, CCTH, which is now racial equality in Tower Hamlets, REAT. And at that time, I decided that organization should do its best to help a Black woman of Jamaican background who had come to the organization's meeting in the Montefiore Centre in Hanbury Street off Brick Lane in East London. And the woman was presenting a very personally emotional account of how she had been suspected of stealing child benefit. And as a result of that suspicion, she was arrested by the London Metropolitan Police and taken to the Limehouse Police Station. Now, Limehouse Police Station is situated not far from what is called the Canary Wharf. Now, that woman came to that organization, which was absolutely unbelievably rare, because until that particular incident, and I had been actively involved in active communication and attending that organization, whose paid employee, I was not paid or anything, I'm never paid, but the point was that I would go there every single day that I could attend. And the paid person was called Joe Hunt. Now, Joe Hunt was physically a significant individual and whose name is on the records as the man who wrote the pamphlet, Police Nigger Hunt in Notting Hill, that is West London. So it was a coincidence, more than a coincidence. So this Black woman came to that meeting, which was, as I said, unheard of, because I had been going there for 11 years. from 1973 up to when it happened, February, this incident happened. This woman came and made that report. That was 11 years later. And in the 11 years, no such case had been brought to the attention of the Council of Citizens of Tower Hamlets. Now, my role in bringing to life an otherwise dead Joe Hunt is not to be related here, but I will relate it elsewhere in due course. Joe Hunt was socially, politically, evidentially absolutely dead. He was alive physically, biologically, but he was otherwise dead. And he was completely dead when it came to taking up issues of racism. And there was not once one single case of police racism that Joe Hunt wanted to raise during the 11 years up to that date that I had been in contact with him. Now, so that meeting was an ordinary meeting, either a monthly meeting or a regular meeting. But there was nothing in the agenda, and there was no notification about anyone else coming into the meeting. And when the woman came, she sat on one side, and I had no idea what she was doing, except to assume that as a black person, she was there to attend the meeting, and she probably had an interest in attending the meeting. That's the maximum that I could think of. Of course, my assumption was seriously kind of challenged by the events that unfolded during the last part of that same meeting. The woman began to report that she was a teacher at a secondary school in Tower Hamlets, and that she had gone to the post office, the nearest post office, to cash her child benefit. She had one single child, and she had been doing the child benefit as a mother regularly by visiting the post office on a scheduled date and cashing the child benefit as per usual. Except on this occasion, she was told by the postmaster that she was not telling the truth and the child benefit didn't belong to her and that she was stealing it. And then he called the police, and the police duly arrested her and took her to the local nearest police station, which was Limehouse. And the woman, I cannot recall the exact length of time she spoke for, but for however long she spoke, at that encounter, I found it completely, again, shocking, because she was weeping and she was crying and she was weeping and she was crying and she was shedding tears. So after she finished, I moved at the meeting that the organization whose meeting it was took up the woman's case, and it was unanimously agreed as based on what I said. The woman later in the evening rang me from her home on a landline from her home in Wyatt Park in Lambeth. And one of the things she said was that she was impressed by my conduct at the meeting. What happened after that conversation is, of course, possible to be related, but not in this particular edition. So it was this woman that came to my temporary accommodation at 77 Chudley Street, London E1, which is not far from the commercial road and not far from the Troxy. Now, we shall be talking about the Troxy later. And so, on the basis of that information, this particular woman drove the car and we went to Tottenham. Now, we drove around, not many times, but we drove around a fair bit, but we could not see a massive gathering of people. What there was scattered gathering of people. And then soon, the main streets near the police station appeared to be quite deserted. So it was decided that we would look on the side roads, and the woman drove the car and it was parked underneath what we later knew was the Broadwater building. But there was absolutely no sign, totally no sign of any movement of anyone. This is remarkable. So it was decided that we move away from there because there was nothing happening. And the woman drove to a place where she knew somebody, a family relative, and parked her car outside the family relative's house. And she went into the house while I remained in the car. And she did some family contracting there. While I sat in the car, I could see flames rising, not far from where the car was. Flames rising. It was later discovered that it was the flames rising about the place where we had parked earlier. And all the reports and all the prosecutions and everything else that followed. Now, it was, of course, reported later during the night that a policeman had been killed during the riots that followed. It was we gathered that this was the fire that rose, was the fire that was being burned, lighted during the riots, the confrontations. Now, I have checked the kind of archives, accessible archives on the internet, and there is nothing news-wise that is being observed today, on today's date, by Fleet Street, by any political party, organization, or political personality, or any member of parliament or member of the House of Peers. This is also the October, the month that has been kind of ritually observed under the banner of Black History Month. Now, Black History Month was created by somebody who was involved with a thing called ASA, based in South London, and it was given funding by the then still alive Greater London Council. And Black History Month was itself a racially prejudiced, ignorant initiative because it left out people from the main African kind of background and Asian background in the main. And it really focused on African origin people from the Caribbean. So when I attempted, subsequent to the events of 6th of October 1985, to keep myself informed about what was going on as a result of the campaign, etc., against police racism, I noticed that some of the individuals in the kind of community in Broadwater Farm in Haringey physically gave me very hostile and poisonous look. Why did they do that? To this day, I don't know why they did that. But I do know why they did that because of the context. Because the people of the African background, direct African background, and people of African origin from the Caribbean have been told about the Asian people being their enemies. Now, I, of course, can understand that because many of the Asian people that were in Africa and some of the Asian people that were in the Caribbean had different relationship with the people of African origin. Now, I understand that. But to assume straight away by looking at me that I was politically, ideologically, or in any other way disposed in the same way as those people towards people of African and African origin backgrounds was totally moronic and stupid. And this remains the case. And so called leaders of the Caribbean, African, or West Indian community don't seem to understand that people from Bangladesh, people from Pakistan, people from India are not politically in any way to be compared with the people that might have gone to the Caribbean or Africa as a result of the British colonialist transportation, etc., etc. And another thing, that most of the Caribbean people seem to think in the grotesque, stupid way that most Asian people are in their brainwashed state. Most Asian people are of the lower class. Now, how stupid can that be? In India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, there are nearly 2 billion people. And in the 2 billion people, not even 100,000 could be classed in that way proportionately. And all our politics and all our campaigns against the British imperialists and so on are done by people who have no idea about what this lowest class of people are or were. And it is quite clear that this woman who came and gave me the lift to the Tottenham later said herself that Asian people in the Caribbean were of the lowest class. She had no idea who she was telling this to. She still doesn't seem to, I don't believe that she understood or still understands where I come from. So the Black History Month is a grotesque abuse of the facts of the battles against racism that people of African and Asian backgrounds are still engaged in. And Black History Month is part of the curriculum vitae of the most corrupt councillors and council employees in London or in similar places like Birmingham. Black History Month is stupidly observed as a routine, as a ritual, just like Joe Hunt had politically died while he was being paid handsome money as the main employee at the Council of Citizens of Tower Hamlets. These people observe the Black History Month as a morgue. They attend the morgue, and that's it. And they put this tick, and nothing else happens. Which is why Black African Caribbean youngsters, mainly male but not exclusively, keep murdering other Black people. What kind of history is it that does not recognize this daily occurrence or regular occurrence? They talk about the Empire Windrush, I think, and that kind of thing. But they don't talk about the Black youngsters murdering other Black youngsters. And the apartheid sponsored weekly newspaper, The Voice, which I called The Vice, does the same mental slavery thing. Now, one of the people kind of involved with the Vice newspaper, now given a kind of diversity display job at the Guardian, the racist Guardian, is Joseph Harker. Harker doesn't know what has been going on, what fights, battles have been going on. Harker is an artificial kind of member of the political Black careerists, like the Sri Lankan origin anti-Muslim racist liar George Alagitt. Joseph Harker and George Alagitt do not have any idea about the struggle against racism. So therefore, Joseph Harker has written in The Guardian a completely bogus, hugely exaggerated tribute to Alex Pascal. Now, Alex Pascal is politically a quarter aware. He's not even half aware of the political battles that have been going on in this country since he came here. And Joseph Harker doesn't know that around Pascal's role at the London BBC Radio London, Black Londoners, there was no politics. There was no truthful journalism or commentary. If you take away what I contributed from time to time, I didn't contribute because of any money. There never was any money. But I contributed by telephone and I contributed by appearing. And every time Alex Pascal presenting came across as being completely ill-informed and ignorant. That applies to Rifraf Ali. Now, Rifraf Ali, officially known as Arif Ali, was the mental slave who dedicated himself to worshipping the crook Ken Livingstone Livingstone. Because Ken Livingstone Livingstone abused his position as leader of the Greater London Council and bribed Rifraf Ali to the tune of hundreds of thousands of GLC pounds. And Rifraf Ali decorated the pages of the Caribbean Times, which was launched to praise Ken Livingstone. Not to bury him. It was to praise Ken Livingstone. And it did praise Ken Livingstone. To a much lesser extent, another crook, Another crook that was funded by the GLC as a bribe was Patel, who ran a number of Gujarati-based outlets. Now, this Patel was a crook who was like Rifraf Ali, a crook that worshipped Ken Livingstone Livingstone. In return for Livingstone Livingstone stealing the public money from the GLC and bribing these crooks, who would then praise him, that is Ken Livingstone Livingstone, every single page. So there is no indication in any of these publications. And if you look at their archives, you cannot find the truth about what happened to Cynthia Jarrett, what happened to Winston Silcott, who was completely wrongly convicted of the murder of the policeman, P.C. Blakelock. And you cannot find any truth about what happened to Cherry Groves in Brixton. There is no evidence that any all black, that is to say, African and Asian people who are directly targeted by the racist police, came together as a result of any of these events and deliberated on the actual proceedings of the various incidents and then agreed a formula in order to put forward to the councils, to parliament, to the media as demands in accordance with the various constitutional law, treaty obligations that the UK is under. I'm the only one who talks about these treaties. Nobody else talks about the treaties. That shows two things. One is that I'm the only one who is aware, sufficiently aware, of the role of these treaties constitutionally, and also that I'm the only one who knows that treaties are devised and were devised for being practiced to improve the quality of society. Is there anyone else doing that? Or have I made an exaggerated claim? I have not made an exaggerated claim here or anywhere else. Why would I make an exaggerated claim? What happened in the interview that the racist criminal Sarah Bosley conducted with me on the telephone in March 1992 about the Stratford School and the campaign that I was organizing and mobilizing to defend the rights of the parents, rights of the guardians, parent and guardian governors of the school. There is nothing in the curriculum of that kind of school or any other school that actually contains a realistic reference to the events, either of the two October events in Brixton and in Tottenham, or the beginning of 1981 events between the police and the black youth in St. Paul's in Bristol. There is no reference. There is no actual understanding or study or whatever. Now, there is a woman called Paulette North. She has been involved with a trendy kind of outlet in Brixton since she moved to Brixton. It's a radio, Ujama radio. And it is not political. It is absolutely not political because she became a candidate for the mayor of Brixton on behalf of the discredited George Galloway outlet. But she withdrew quite soon, and there was nothing that she published which showed any relationship with the reality and her cabal, because she is part of the trendy so and so's collected together from mainly, generally, Jamaican background. She's of Jamaican and South East Asian background. Either she is from Vietnamese or Thai or Cambodian, one of those. So she could be classed as, appearance wise, she could be classed as of ethnic Chinese appearance. And she had a boyfriend, Alfred Tang Chow, of similar background. But Tang Chow was highly drunk most of the times. But somehow, at one stage, Tang Chow managed to get hold of controlling the then West Indian World Weekly, in the early 1980s, sometime or mid 1980s. Now, Tang Chow ran this until I lost contact with him, and I heard from other sources that he had died. But Tang Chow was highly charged, drunk individual. Despite all of that, sometimes he managed to produce paper that contained a column that I wrote. Now he said to me, a confession, that it was my column that was the selling point. Well, no surprise, because the rest of the paper was stuffed with riffraff kind of type of rubbish. Now, if you read the columns that I did write, by hand, of course, you will find that everything I said in the 1980s, before this thing happened in Brixton and in Tottenham, politically, organizationally, and evidentially, was vindicated, came true later. Now, my whole thesis has been that imperialists are actively keeping people of African and Asian backgrounds generally separate from organizing and mobilizing. So I wanted to break that, and I attempted many times, including the 1980 event in based. It was held in Notting Hill, and it was called the Black Media Workers Association. The idea was to use whatever black media there was to tell the story of the black community at the time. Now, one of the people involved there, at least present, was Mike Phillips, who is an older brother of Trevor Terrible Phillips, the mental slave. Mike Phillips was there, and a few other people there. Now, Dirty Di Abbott joined later, but she was kind of pumped and primed later by Ken Livingstone fronted GLC to intrude into the organization and sabotage its agenda that we had agreed. There was a very rowdy, kind of noisy meeting held in the GLC's county hall, where Diane Abbott was openly accused of lying and having misled the agenda of the Black Media Workers Association. Now, that was one of my attempts to kind of bring together at least some of the Black and African and Asian people as a start to make an intellectual effort to challenge the racists separating apartheid kind of divisions between Africans and Asians in the context of racism in this country. The same thing happened with the field of so-called education. So when the Swan Committee was kind of commissioned, it was commissioned in the context of campaigners like me demanding an end to racism at various stages. And the Swan Committee was formed by having people like Trevor Carter as members. Now, who is Trevor Carter? Now, Trevor Carter is passed now, but he was an employee of the Greater London Council's committee. Now, ILEA was a part of the Greater London Council constitutionally. It was the Education Committee of the Greater London Council, otherwise known as the Inner London Education Authority. Now, Trevor Carter was an early member of the Caribbean Teachers Association. And so therefore he was able to kind of hold this thing in front of him, in front of everyone, and say that he was a genuine diversity display material. On that basis, Trevor Carter was given that job in the Inner London Education Authority. Now, by the time I arrived at the Inner London Education Authority as a representative of the community in Tower Hamlets, resulting from the election in October 1982, this is October 2022, so it's full decades later. 92, 2002, 12, this is completely 40 years ago. And I arrived there and I was duly elected chair of the group without any opposition. And when I was appointed or elected chair of the group of Black representatives from across the 10 boroughs in the ILEA area, people like Trevor Carter didn't like that, because Trevor Carter knew that he had hoodwinked and misled the white ones so long as they didn't care and they didn't know the facts. In my case, he knew that I knew the facts and I did care. So one day I organized to meet Trevor Carter. And this is the history, Black History Month I'm telling here. I arranged as a member of the schools subcommittee, which was the biggest committee of the Inner London Education Authority. I was a member of two other committees. One was the staff in general, and another one was a smaller committee. But the schools subcommittee was the biggest one because it had the remit of looking at the behavior of the schools in all 10 boroughs in the Inner London Education Authority. So I sat there with Trevor Carter in good faith, but also I had an awareness as a long-standing campaigner and a journalist that Trevor Carter would be up to tricks to waste the time and sabotage the interview. So I noticed what he was doing. What was Trevor Carter doing? I was there for a meeting with him about what he was doing about fighting racism within the Inner London Education Authority, because he was employed as a multi-ethnic diversity display. And as soon as I attempted to start speaking, I could hardly finish a sentence when the landline extension in front of Trevor Carter would ring. Now, this happened during a period of about an hour. This happened about 20 times. Now, it is unheard of that anyone would be called as many times as Trevor Carter successfully had organized to be called at that short kind of period. And you couldn't hear what the other caller was saying. All you could hear or see was Trevor Carter was looking as grave as he could possibly manage himself to look. And he said absolutely nothing that I could remember. So I knew that Trevor Carter had plotted for days, because organizing this meeting with him took weeks to organize, because he was being evasive. And what Trevor Carter was doing was saying how busy he was. Now, this is the same man who, in the kind of records of the West India or Caribbean teachers, would be referred to as one of the leaders of the struggle and fighting campaigns against racism. But he was lying. Trevor Carter was plainly lying to me. And Trevor Carter was lying in order to keep his job. That showed that his job was to appease the racists and not to oppose the racists. Now, there is another character in the multi-ethnic operation of the Inner London Education Authority. There was a white man married to a very black-skinned black woman. And this white man was called Bab Woodruff. Bab Woodruff was another liar. They were multi-ethnic operation, and this black woman was accordingly so. So you could see the black faces interspersed with the likes of Bab Woodruff. Bab Woodruff was a very sociable individual, very sociable, and in ordinary terminology was very pleasant. But he was a liar. So the brainwashing was going on in full swing in the Inner London Education Authority, fronted by Frances Morel. Now, Frances Morel's entry in the history books include the fact that she was an assistant political aide to Tony Benn. Now, Tony Benn, as I've said, on his records, was a racist liar. He stole the references to the likes of, and kind of the quotations that were attributed to the likes of M.K. Gandhi. Tony Benn distorted them to such an extent that when he retold them, they came across almost as if those were his words. They never were. So Frances Morel, whom I gave the name immoral because of her immorality, was for a short time in Parliament as an aide to Tony Benn, who was the relevant member of Parliament. And Tony Benn became a member of Parliament by lying. And the fact that he lied is proven now by his elder son, Stephen, being in the House of Lords in his place, Tony Benn's place, named Viscount Ben or whatever, Stansgate, Viscount Stansgate. Tony Benn wanted to be a member of parliament in order, in his ambition to become the leader of the Parliamentary Labour Party. But he was a son of a baron, Viscount Stansgate, and he could not be an MP, and he couldn't go to the House of Commons. So he worked out a plot to say that the law should be changed and that it should be changed to allow viscounts like him or barons like him to contest parliamentary seats, elections. That's how he created the myth that he renounced his peerage, that he was such a common person. Tony Benn was a cultivated liar. And while he was a socialist smoking grotesquely that offensive pipe, he was a millionaire. He was a member of the Benn family company that was getting, its annual turnout was few million pounds at least. And none of his, let's say, disciples, like the crooks, racist liar, MP that wrote the book, Chris, whatever, and the moron, Jeremy Corbyn, or Ken Livingston. I mean, Tony Benn produced quite a few pamphlets, but his disciples produced even more. And while the GLC was in place under the crook Ken Livingston, these criminals posing as socialists overused all the spaces in the county hall to hold promotional events promoting the so-called books. Now I say this under the reference to the corrupt Black History Month slogan kind of events. There is no reference in any of those racist books of the struggle or the struggles of Black people. And by Black, I mean and include African background people, Asian background people as well, because of the fact. Now, Ken Livingston surveyed the whole empire, that is to say, the empire that you could find among the people in the UK, in London, people of the backgrounds from the Caribbean, from Africa, from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh. And he could not understand how I turned out to be so opposed to him and so clearly opposed to him. I mean, all the Trevor Carters and all the others were compliant. When the 1985 events took place, the riots so-called, the GLC organized propaganda events in the county hall. And the GLC events, by definition, at that time, compulsorily included the fraudster, liar, the cunt, Paul Botang. So the cunt, Paul Botang, was being given deferential treatment by the so-called black media. Instead of being quizzed about the GLC's role, the Botang, the cunt, was being given deferential treatment. And the cunt put on appropriate appearance of being very pleased with himself, except when I spoke. When he put on a very dark kind of demeanor, and I told him off. I said he was a slave, mental slave. No wonder that the GLC police committee, which the crook Botang was supposedly the chair of or the responsible for, produced fuck all about the police role in London generally and the police behavior towards black people, against black people. And there is no sign. If you look at the list of the Black History Month events advertised by the crook Ruxana Fias, the so-called executive mayor at the expense of the people of Newham, she has got as false a list of items in the Black History Month events as has Tower Hamlets, which is fronted by the crooked Lutfur Rahman, executive mayor, and his crooked crooked colluders in the council. And you find the same thing in Hackney, which is lumbered with another corrupt executive mayor. As you find in Lewisham, as you find in other London boroughs that are actually deigning to even acknowledge the words Black History Month. But it's a desert. It's a desert of mental slaves completely spread as carpet of servitude, while their racist masters and mistresses walk over them. Fuck the lot of them. Black History Month. How is it that Black History Month is being done without a single mention of why black youths are murdering other black youths? Where is the mind? What happens in the mind, in the brains? What happens in the actual schooling and brainwashing that makes it possible for a black young person in a racist society, where both sides, the target and the attacker, are the targets of racism and racist discrimination? What happens to make them murder one another? Why isn't this question asked? When I asked this individual head teacher, a black woman, why was she excluding so many black children? Or why was she excluding so many children? Because not every single excluded child was black, but the majority of the excluded were black. She said that the reason why they were being excluded was so that the majority of the pupils could be given a safe environment in the school to pursue education, to pursue learning. Now, at the end of the schooling, at the end of the so-called formal education, most, or formal schooling, let's say, most of the ones that go through the schooling and are from the Caribbean background, Afro-Caribbean background, or from Asian backgrounds, most of them, regardless of their actual qualification, experience hostility, barriers, obstruction, prejudice, and discrimination. This is not confined to those who don't have the requisite qualifications. This extends to and includes African, Asian, male and female kind of quote graduates, and they get discriminated against. Where in the Black History Month is the explanation, investigation about all of this? And the fact that these don't actually occur in the calendar, Black History Month calendar, shows that the Black History Month is the killing of the Black History Month. I mean, this so-called Black Lives Matter slogan, what has it done? I mean, that display of military style kind of display staged somewhere in South London, but mainly men and women of African background or African origins, no Asians there. What message did it give? Black History Month, but it's like a paratroops. What war were they fighting? And who was the enemy? And where was the actual target? Where is the actual agenda? And where are these people when this young man has been murdered by the London Metropolitan Police at the beginning of September in London? Where are they? When the criminals of the GLC police committee issued various pamphlets and various statements, they actually did those by listening to 2 or 3 racists, one of whom is a white solicitor, is a woman practicing as white solicitor. She was the one who was brainwashing the current mayor of London, the shit boy Sadiq Khan. Is this woman called Louise Christian? She's a racist. She's a completely, absolutely racist criminal. And she screwed the GLC and got herself promoted as the author of this, that, and the other. But there was nothing in the GLC police committee's publications that took into account what was going on at the time in London between the police and the public. Most certainly not what was going on in Tower Hamlets. Remember, there was in Bethnal Green this thing called Kappa. This Kappa was formed, and it was the full name was Community Alliance for Police Accountability. Now, this was apparently a result of the police attack on a children's play group or something. So it was shown as a sensible middle class bourgeois white kind of reaction to oppressive policing in Bethnal Green. Nothing could be further from the truth. This was part of the corrupt Ken Lying Still Livingstone and Paul Kwarteng's propaganda initiative. They wanted to have locally based community groups active in holding the police to account so that they could bribe these groups and make them sing the praise of the GLC police committee. As part of my work, I exposed the police committee more than once. And I said it was sham. One of my actions took place at a press conference kind of hosted by one of the Guardian's kind of employees, whose name I cannot remember this minute, but I'll come to remember his name because his name can be found in the archives. And it was organized at the county hall to promote the image of the cunt, Paul Kwarteng. And this guy who was making the presentation was also taking pictures of the audience, the persons present, with his camera. So I stood up and I said, so this is supposed to be a press conference where journalists are supposed to take your pictures, not you taking the pictures of the journalists. I'm not quoting myself, but effectively that is the substance of what I stood up to say and did say. At which point, the cunt, Paul Kwarteng, immediately branded me as from the Daily Mail. Now, that cunt is so grotesquely ignorant and ill-educated about the whole world. How could he work out that I was from the Daily Mail? That would not be a question any Fleet Street journalist would ever ask. I am not from Fleet Street. I never was from Fleet Street. I am from an ethical sphere that transcends these crooks of Fleet Street and their slaves like Paul Kwarteng. I asked an objective question that remains valid now, even now, decades later. So I said to Kwarteng to shut up. Was it that kind of behavior by me that convinced these slaves that I was actually undermining the African black people? I most certainly was not. But that's what they believed. And I think that's what they still believe. Because they're slaves, mental slaves, they believe any ethical, evidential, independent, highly intelligent question must be from some imagined enemy. The Daily Mail has never been beyond the grasp. I have known about the Daily Mail long before the likes of Paul Kwarteng and other cunts were even out of the primary school if they were born already. The Daily Mail appeased the Nazis in the 1930s, as did the Times. And I have always considered the Daily Mail as the epitome of the British racist imperialists. Long before I came to this country, I had access to the Daily Mail, and I could read the Daily Mail, and I could sense just how poisonously racist and stupid it was. So I had no need for the likes of the cunt Paul Botang telling me that my questioning of him amounted to my being from the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail would run 1,000 miles if they ever hear that I was in any way associated with them. They know that they cannot rebuff or rebut me. They can rebut all the mental slaves, but they cannot rebut me. So this criminal that was working in the European kind of union and was hired by the GLC police committee, who was chairing that propaganda show, press conference at the county hall, to make the cunt Paul Bottom come across as if he was doing something. I'm looking for his name, and I shall speak his name before this edition is finished. Black History Month. There was a public meeting in the Bethnal Green Road held at the corner of Wilmot Street and Bethnal Green Road. Small meeting, but it did take place. And the meeting had been organized in protest against a Jamaican woman stopping a Muslim woman wearing a hijab and physically beating her up in Bethnal Green. Where did that Jamaican woman get all these ideas? And where is the spar for the hostility? Because this Muslim woman in the Bethnal Green area was not on a plantation in the Caribbean 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It was happening in the 20th century. So, who taught these Jamaican women to do that, to attack these Asian women with a hijab? I was reading the Times newspaper on a number 15 bus, and I got on the Times on the 15 bus in Trafalgar Square. And by the time the bus reached Limehouse, because I was going beyond Limehouse to the east, I noticed that there were two black boys, must be from the Caribbean background or Jamaican origin or African origin. They were openly mocking me for reading the Times newspaper. Now, how do you explain that? What did they think was wrong with my reading the Times? They must have associated the Times with something that they were not familiar with. And they must have associated Asians with those who are not capable of reading the Times newspaper. Did they know who I was? I had been reading the Times long before I came to this country, because that was the newspaper that I had access to. But whatever the reason, why would that hostility be? I would not do that if I saw a person of Caribbean or African background reading anything or doing anything. So where did that come from? Is that part of the Black History Month? Who is teaching the history and who is teaching the action that is happening now? Now, I shall talk about that meeting that took place in the Balance Road on the 8th of May 1985. Where the GLC Police Committee employee Paul Gilroy was the main speaker. Now, Gilroy witnessed an anti-Asian attack made by an African at that meeting. Who had organized that meeting? And who tolerated the attack? Because Gilroy later justified the attack on me in a completely hostile and untruthful way. He said that he did not like the attacker and he did not like the victim. There was no reason for Gilroy saying that. There was no evidence to substantiate that. I had known Paul Gilroy's mother. And I shall come to Paul Gilroy in another edition. Now, who decided to give Paul Gilroy the serial promotion as the modern day sage? He is the source of some of the nastiest racist attacks on the black community and anti-racists in this country. Who decided to give him a PhD or other accolades? This is racism in the extreme. And that gathering on the 8th of May 1985 was orchestrated, intentionally organized by Paul Gilroy and others. The criminal whose name was there as the organizer has changed his name and disappeared from the public records. All the white ones that were present there were very strange because they were not the usual white folks that would attend that gathering, and it was a completely false gathering. Gilroy wanted to have that, and Gilroy has probably thought that this didn't happen. It's part of the sabotaging the black community struggle month. Gilroy should never have been employed by the GLC, but the fact that he was employed by the GLC showed where the GLC police committee was heading. It wasn't heading to hold the police to account, in practice, that is. All kinds of bluff was contained in the various pamphlets and leaflets and utterances issued by the GLC. It was not the truth. And the GLC Police Committee chair, the cunt Paul Botang, was colluding privately with the police. While he was supposedly the chair of the police committee, the cunt Paul Botang became a member of the Belmarsh Police College, and so on. And Botang didn't report to the GLC publicly about his private dealings with the police. What were there was this GLC police committee. I have to find the name of this criminal. And let's see if we can find the name of this criminal. The criminal that was taking the pictures of the journalists present at the so-called press conference held at the county hall about the police. And I was the one who stood up and demanded to know why he was taking the pictures. Here's the GLC Police Committee Support Unit had that Paul Gilroy on it. So this was the Greater London Enterprise Board. This was the thing that employed this criminal. So it was this was the Greater London Enterprise Board, and we shall find the name of the criminal in due course, not necessarily in this current hour, but we shall. So Paul Kwarteng was being promoted by this creep who was the heavy duty self exhibitionist centering on Europe and writing a lot of rubbish. And based on that lot of rubbish, he was hired by the GLC. And he concentrated on the policing as well as similar other aspects. Now, policing in London, as all the current admissions show, the Telegraph is admitting, the Times is admitting, and the Guardian is admitting that the police is in serious crisis in this country, generally. And the police is in more crisis in London than anywhere else. And the reason why the policing is in crisis is because the policing has never been held to account. Institutionally, the police has been allowed to make the rules as it went along. And this is what has been happening in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I spent the whole day in May 1981 as my investigative evidence gathering effort to establish who the shit this Paul Kwarteng was, because there was this endless propaganda that Paul Kwarteng was the first black member of the GLC. What the fuck? So I decided to go to County Hall and ask him a lot of questions. As is established, my questions cannot be answered by Kwarteng or anybody else, because my questions are not intended to facilitate self-exhibition. My questions are always intended to check the veracity of the claim, and that cannot be substantiated by the person that is lying. And Kwarteng was, of course, the most overhyped exhibition. The hyping had been done by himself as well as by the Labour Party. So he was supposed to be the prime exhibit. But he had no answers to my questions. But I did give him the opportunity. I asked him the questions in 1981 that I'm still waiting for answers to in 2022. And Black History Month was not conceived by that time anyway. All the Black History Month kind of celebrations that have been taking place since this was launched, mainly under the ASA thing, and then joined by others. The ones that decide on the agenda and the direction are also the ones that would want to frustrate the telling of the truth about the many black skinned skin savers and their kind of souls, SOULS. There was no event in the 5 years that the Greater London Council existed after the election of May 1981 until it was scrapped in 1986. In the 5 years, the GLC spent hundreds of millions of pounds. And one of the main achievements was to make the name Ken Livingstone so familiar that people couldn't forget it even if they tried. Ken lying still Livingstone. Hello? Who is that? Who? I'm being interrupted by somebody in the neighborhood. So this is 22:13 GMT on Thursday, the 6th of October 2022. 1 hour and 40 minutes. Shall we continue on all these items and themes in due course?